Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our webinar. We're just going to give everybody a few more minutes to keep joining. I see our audience numbers are still ticking up, so we're just going to go ahead and get started in about 2 minutes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're giving people a little bit of time to join onto the webinar. Our numbers are still ticking up, so we'll get started in about 1 minute. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're just giving people a little bit of time to join into the webinar, and we'll get started in about 1 minute. Right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar focusing on reopening during coronavirus in Illinois. My name is James ONeill. I'm the Director of Suburban Outreach for the Illinois Business Immigration Coalition. IBIC represents a growing and diverse coalition of businesses, business associations, and industry leaders advocating for common sense immigration reform, and during this pandemic, advocating for programs that serve the small business community equitably. Before we get started, I want to thank our co-hosts and partners, Cook County President Tony Preckwinkle, Self-Help Federal Credit Union, the Illinois Restaurant Association, and the National Partnership for New Americans, as well as the Illinois Retail Merchants Association joining us today. Without these people and these organizations, this webinar would not have been possible, so we thank you very much. Because a lot of our webinars have been focused on the Paycheck Protection Program, I just want to give a quick update about what's going on with that program before we jump into our presentation. Congress has already passed and the President approved Paycheck Protection Program extension to 24 weeks and increased flexibility on how you can use the money. So it's to be eligible for forgiveness, it is now over 60% of your payroll. 60% of the loan must be spent on payroll to be eligible for forgiveness, and 40% on other expenses. I also want to point out that there is still $100 billion left in the Paycheck Protection Program, so please contact ABIC or IBIC if you need any help applying for that program. It's a good program, and we would love to see people take advantage of it. Also, before we get started, I want to note, if you have any questions over the course of the webinar, please feel free to type them into the question bar on your viewing panel. We have a little bit of a non-traditional schedule today. Our first presenter is Mr. Rob Carr with the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, and we will be doing a short question and answer with him specifically right after his presentation. So if you have questions for Rob Carr, please type them in while he's presenting, and then we'll be able to address them when he's done. But to get us started, as I mentioned, we have Mr. Rob Carr. Rob is the current president and CEO of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association. Prior to joining IRMA, he worked with the Illinois Manufacturers Association and has been with IRMA since 1994. In 2012, he was named Executive Vice President and assumed the position of President in 2014. Rob has been appointed to numerous boards such as the Illinois Department of Public Health and the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Please welcome Mr. Rob Carr.
Good morning, and thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. And briefly about the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, or IRMA. We represent retailers of all types and sizes, from the largest to the smallest, and every type of retail that you can think of, from hospitality to apparel to hardware and pharmacy, grocery, you name it, we have it in some fashion. I was asked to speak today regarding the Phase 3 reopening and some of the best practices that everyone ought to be thinking about as you make your way through Restore Illinois. So we'll touch on these and leave time for questions and answers. As you think about just general requirements, PPE requirements, personal protection, the face coverings are required for everyone. That's employees, customers, vendors, anyone that's coming into your location should be wearing a face mask. Retailers are asked to post signs to encourage consumers to be aware that they're required to wear them, to use their public address announcements if they have them, to post signage throughout the store that face masks are required. That includes for employees. Additionally, for employees, if you're unable to provide adequate social distance, that is 6 feet or more, you should be thinking about other ways to create that social distance. So I know many retailers put in place plexiglass shields between consumers and the employee at point of sale. Those are examples of some other things you can put in place. Face shields would be another. Anything that helps create some sort of barrier between the consumer and the employee should be considered. When it comes to social distancing, you have the 6-foot visual cues that many of us have now seen on stores. Most of us see them at point of sale, but we should also be thinking about how customers travel through our stores and where they tend to congregate. So if you use a grocery store as an example, if you find people congregating in the produce section, you may want to have some additional visual cues on the floor in those areas, demonstrating what 6-foot spacing looks like. Or, for example, if in front of the bakery or deli counter would be another area where people might congregate in addition to the point of sale. You should have an employee whose job it is to remind people occasionally as they see them to maintain social distancing throughout the store as well. We are encouraging, as we have throughout, we have encouraged everyone to expand their e-commerce presence, that is to encourage curbside pickup and delivery where possible. I know we hear from many that those systems are fairly close to maxed out, at least for the moment. They're very labor intensive, but nevertheless, we encourage you to continue to look at how to expand those out. Now, it's very difficult for retail because employees, we have to be there for our customers. But to the extent that you can have employees work from home, you're strongly encouraged to have them continue to do so. You have to have sanitizing products available for employees and customer use as well. Warm water and soap is clearly an option for employees, but also recommended to place sanitizing products in high traffic areas. Again, as people enter the store and perhaps as they exit as well. Chicago, the city of Chicago is a little bit different here in that they also require businesses to ensure that employees have at least one hygiene break in addition to any scheduled meal or normal break. So be sure to give employees a brief opportunity to have that extra hygiene break to properly wash their hands and sanitize where possible. In terms of sanitation, you should also be looking at cleaning carts and baskets in between users. If you're an apparel store and you have a return, and you have a return, the return should be segregated. If you have a fitting room, those should be cleaned between uses if they're not closed outright. Upon returning, many retailers were closed prior to Phase 3, and so if you have not already done so, you are supposed to train employees on health and safety training around COVID and social distancing upon their returning to work, and you're strongly encouraged to have done this within the first 30 days of opening. So if you haven't done so, we would encourage you to do so. Travel is continued to be encouraged to limit to all non-essential business travel wherever possible. When it comes to health and wellness, this is very important. Sick employees and any employee that's exhibiting symptoms should stay home, and the employer should be proactive about encouraging their employees who are demonstrating any symptoms to remain at home while they're symptomatic. You should also have temperature checks for your employees that are available. If you can't have those available for whatever reason, for example, the digital thermostats are not readily available, or you haven't received the shipment. If you have ordered them, the employer should encourage the employees to check their temperature prior to reporting for work. Employers do have to have a wellness screening program, and there is one readily available at the state's Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity website that you can utilize. It's just a checklist to screen your employees as they report for work. You're also encouraged to conduct the check has to be in person when they're reporting to work, and you're also encouraged to conduct a mid-shift screening. Now, this mid-shift screening does not have to be in person necessarily. It certainly can be, but it doesn't have to be. It could be something as simple as a reminder text or some other means of just checking up on your employees to ensure they have not become symptomatic in the midst of their shift. This is very difficult for retail, and we're aware of that. Retailers, unlike, for example, manufacturers, don't have a set 9 to 5 shift, but nevertheless, you're encouraged to do that, to check on those. If you have an employee who demonstrates positivity for COVID, they should stay home for 10 days if they test positive for COVID-19. And before returning to work, they have to be feverless for 72 hours without the aid of medication, or they have to have 2 negative tests taken at least 24 hours apart. The testing has pretty recently become widely available, so obtaining testing should not be a problem, but they have to have at least 2 negative tests 24 hours apart. And then if an employee has been in close contact with another employee who developed COVID-19, that employee should self-quarantine for 14 days at home or wherever they quarantine, but preferably at home. And that is if they have been in close contact for a prolonged period of time with the employee. If an employee develops COVID-19, regardless of whether or not they developed it at work, the fact that they were there, the employer must do a deep cleaning according to CDC standards. You don't have to close your business to do this, but you have to perform that work as soon as practicable. Most will hire a firm to do it, but you are certainly capable of doing it on your own if you're a small to mid-sized retailer or employer. The CDC, Center for Disease Control, has clear guidelines, including what constitutes appropriate products for sanitizing for the COVID-19 virus, and you're encouraged to use those guidelines to conduct your deep cleaning. You should notify the employees who've been exposed, but you have to refrain from giving any identifying information of who the COVID positive employee is. And then you should notify the public health department if you have 2 or more employees test positive in a 14-day period. So if you have 1, don't have to worry about it. Just do your cleaning as you're supposed to do, inform your employees. But if you have 2 or more in 14 days, inform the public health department to make them aware. When it comes to physical workspace, you should display signage at the front entrance for your retail store notifying customers of social distancing. We touched on this. Chicago also requires you to post signage at the checkout and post reminders for employees. The City of Chicago also requires that if you're handing out samples, those are approved as long as they're individually packaged and handed out by staff. Likewise, in the City of Chicago, bathrooms, if there's only 1 bathroom, then it has to be closed except for employee use. But if there are 2 or more, then 1 is for employees and 1 is for public use. In terms of cleaning and disinfecting procedures, checkout keypads and self-checkout stations should be disinfected after every transaction. Shopping carts and baskets should be disinfected frequently. In the City of Chicago, they require after each customer. You should sanitize all hard surfaces before returning clothing to the sales floor. Bathing suits and undergarments cannot be tried on, but of course that was the rule prior to COVID as well. If you have return items such as apparel that you really can't clean because it ruins their value, you should segregate those items for 72 hours before placing them back on the sales floor. In the City of Chicago, store-issued clothing items, so if your employees wear company-issued smocks, for example, or any other company-issued clothing that are kept at the store, they have to be washed before being worn again. And as I mentioned, sanitize fitting rooms after each use. And in the city of Chicago, the bathrooms have to be cleaned hourly. You're also subject to capacity requirements and staffing. Right now, the maximum is 50% capacity, or 5 people per 1,000 square feet, and that is the employer's choosing. You decide which calculation to utilize. Chicago, however, is a little more restrictive. They're at 25%, which does not include employees, unless you are an essential business. And if you're an essential business, then it's the 50% capacity. And then you should also just design a plan for how you will attain social distancing at the business, covering all of the items that, thinking through all of your procedures, how customers flow through your store, how your employees, where they have to stand and interact with customers, utilize the floor space. You should think through all of that in terms of how to maintain social distancing. And then finally, there's external interactions as well. So your vendor and other suppliers have to have a wellness screening performed. They should be doing that when their employees report to their place of work. And you have to, when the vendors come to you or suppliers, you have to log the vendors and suppliers that enter your business. So if I am delivering something to your store, you have to log the fact that Rob Carr arrived at your store on this date at 10:30 in the morning, and have that available if it's needed for contact tracing. So that's a brief overview of the general practices that are in place for Phase 3. There are some helpful resources that are available. Some of them are duplicative, but it's very good for us to be available. The CDC, Illinois DCEO COVID has a quick links page, and the City of Chicago, as well as the Illinois Department of Public Health, have reopening guidelines and guidances available as well. So there's a great deal of information. There's information also available through IRMA's website, should you wish to find it there or at any of those locations. I'm very proud of the way the retail industry in particular, the one we represent, has responded. In fact, they pioneered many of the practices that have now been put into place. And so we're pleased with the way people are responding. And if you have any questions, I would encourage you to contact us, City Department of Public Health, Illinois Department of Public Health, DCEO, or check any of these helpful resources. I hope this has been a helpful overview, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. I'm going to leave that helpful resources slide up as we move into a few questions for Rob here. First one, how long should hygiene breaks be, and how often should we be giving employees hygiene breaks?
Hygiene break, you just have to provide one hygiene. In the city of Chicago, you have to provide one hygiene break in addition to any other meal break or break that you offer. It simply has to be long enough for them to be able to go back and thoroughly wash their hands, maybe their face, just sanitize. So, 5-10 minutes. It shouldn't take very long.
Okay, great. Here's another one. How do you do wellness screenings of external vendors? You mentioned that that's a requirement. How can you as a retailer make sure that that's being kept up to date?
Right. So their employer should be screening them in person when they show up at work. So when they're showing at your store, you simply have to log who is coming into your store, which the name and the date and time of the supplier who's coming into your store.
Great. Are you aware of any programs either through IRMA or through anywhere else that can help small businesses get everything that they need for this Phase 3, like sanitizing equipment or the personal protective equipment?
There is personal protective equipment available through the state. Yes, we had put out, I think today actually is the deadline. James, I'll send this to you. There's a link that people can go to obtain cloth masks. Those are the most common PPE. I have no central resource for all of it. However, We know that plexiglass is in something of a short supply at the moment, so it's really difficult to have one place to get any of these items. But I'll send you that link, James.
That'd be great, and then we can send it out to our audience today and to all of our people that have registered. Yep. This might be a difficult question, but do you have any best practices for dealing with customers who refuse to wear a mask?
Right. No, actually, we confronted this very early on, and we had some very difficult interactions, particularly early on in the first couple weeks of the mask requirement. You should have clear sign posted. You should use your public address system, and some retailers have chosen to have someone just politely ask someone to wear a mask. If they refuse, we do not encourage personal interaction. Beyond that, obviously, you can't be restraining someone or laying your hands on someone. We do encourage you at that point to call your local law enforcement and let them deal with the situation. We would, however, encourage that you log the date and time and who you talk to at your local law enforcement agency, just to prove the fact that you've followed up on making that call. Great.
And do you know of anywhere where retailers could find templates for signage?
Yes, I'll send that to you as well. But again, it's very simple. You just have to have something up that says, pursuant to the executive order, customers are required to wear face masks while in the store. But yes, James, I will send you something for that as well.
Okay, so then those two links will be going out to our registered audience today. Yep. Moving away a little bit from specifically reopening, but for some other programs that IRMA offers, my business was damaged by the unrest over the past week, and my insurance is not covering what happened. Do you have any advice on options that a retail business might have moving forward?
If your insurance is not covering it and you believe that it should be, I would encourage you to contact one of two entities, either the Department of Insurance or the Illinois Department of Insurance, or the Bureau of Consumer Affairs at the Illinois Attorney General's office. I would start with the Department of Insurance, however, and just check there. But however, if you didn't have insurance or your insurance didn't cover that, there aren't any really good answers for you at this time in terms of getting your insurance to cover it. At that point, then you'd have to be looking at perhaps some of the grant programs, particularly that are becoming available in the city of Chicago.
Thank you. I think we've got two more questions for you. Does IRMA have any programs for minority-owned businesses to become suppliers at larger chains, and how could they apply for those?
Yeah, we do not at the moment have that. We are once again looking at that. The problem is that large chains all have their own unique systems. There's no one unified system. I would encourage someone who would like to do that to go ahead and email us. You can find our email on our website, and we'll be happy to do our best to connect you with the appropriate people at whichever chain or chains you believe your product might be suitable for. So that's the best we can offer at the moment. Again, it's difficult because all of these larger chains have much different ways of doing things.
Thank you. And our last question, we're going back to the reopening question. Are reusable bags still allowed?
Reusable bags are not allowed. They are not allowed.
Great, thank you. Simple answer for that one. Rob, we appreciate your time and for you being able to stick around to answer some questions. If people have additional questions, please visit the IRMA or ABIC website, and we'll make sure to get an answer for you. And again, this PowerPoint is you can download this off of your viewing panel to get those helpful resource links off of the slide that's currently on your screen. So Rob, thank you very much.
James, thank you, and thank you for your flexibility.
All right, I am very excited to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Teresa Hawley. Dr. Hawley has served in many roles in Illinois' early childhood system, too many to name here, but she currently serves as Illinois' Assistant Deputy Governor for Education. In this role, she helps coordinate education policy across the many state agencies that cover the education spectrum, from birth through higher education. So please welcome Dr. Teresa Hawley.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to talk with you today about our plans for reopening childcare in the state. We had to, when we did the stay-at-home order back in March, close all of our childcare centers and all of our licensed homes. And at that time, we started up what we called the emergency childcare system, in which providers were able to get a license to care for children in childcare centers in groups of 10 or fewer, and homes were allowed to operate as license-exempt homes during the time of that emergency order. As we've moved into phase 3, we're changing up how we're doing our system, but the whole time here, we've had 3 main goals. 1, to keep young children learning, the kids who are in Head Start, the kids who are in preschool programs, all of that, to keep connected. 2, to make sure that we were providing emergency care for those families who needed care when they were essential workers. And 3, to sustain our childcare infrastructure. We had a shortage of childcare, generally speaking, across our state, even coming into the pandemic. We wanted to make sure that we didn't lose childcare providers because of the financial hardships that they were going to endure when we had to have our stay-at-home order. So some of the ways that we provided those supports during phases 1 and 2, we continued to pay closed providers who were part of our child care assistance program. We reduced co-payments in the child care assistance program and increased the rates for those who were providing emergency care for children who were enrolled in the child care assistance program. We also made all of our priority essential workers eligible for child care assistance. So people like working in the health system, the grocery store clerks, et cetera, were able to access the child care assistance program regardless of their income during the months of April, May, and June. And we provided stipends to all emergency centers and homes to help offset some of the additional costs that were coming along with providing care in that time. We know now, as in the next slide, as we are trying to reopen our economy, that childcare is absolutely critical for that. About 15% of the workforce depends on childcare to be able to work, and as we start having people going back to work, we know we need to have much more childcare than we had in the emergency phases, because in the emergency phases, the system was operating at maybe only about 10 to 20% of its typical capacity. So we need to figure out how to reopen, and we need to figure out how to reopen safely for children, for staff, and the families that they go home to. So what we did was in May, we convened a work group of over 80 people that helped us discuss all aspects of reopening childcare safely. That work group included providers, it included advocates, state agency folks, researchers, and of course, most important of all, our public health partners that helped us understand what we needed to do to keep our childcare environment safe for the children and the staff and the families they go home to. So a lot of the things that were talked about in the presentation for the retailers are similar to what's going to be needed for childcare providers. One thing that's really different for childcare providers is that much of the hygiene and cleaning that folks are now needing to do in all environments, childcare providers have been doing for years and are quite accustomed to these kind of health and safety protocols. So it's been easier for them to adapt to this, but I think they've had to step it up even more than they do in normal times. So with this work group, we were able to talk through what requirements we wanted to have back in place from our regular licensing rules that we had suspended when we did the emergency childcare system, what kind of things we wanted to ease from the emergency childcare system. So, for example, did we need to stay at only 10 children in a room, or could we expand that a bit? And then what other new requirements did we need to put in place based on the many, many things we learned from the end of March to the middle of May about COVID-19, how it spreads, and how best to avoid that spread within a community like a child care center program or home. We talked a lot about the training and the supplies that people would need to have, how we can help our child care system be prepared for any kind of community outbreaks, and also, very importantly, how to continue to support the system financially, because remember, one of our key goals here is to sustain the child care infrastructure through this whole experience. So the next slide, one of the things that we really had to think about was the demand for child care, because again, even in the emergency phases, we had about 20% of our capacity open, but many of those providers were not full because there was a very low demand for child care outside of the house at that time. We knew it was going to scale up, but really trying to understand how much it was going to scale up and how much that impacted our plans for what we needed to do to reopen safely, we had to consider. So some of the factors that suggested there was going to be a lot more demand, we really looked at who was returning to the workplace in phase 3 and then into phase 4, seeing that nearly 70% of working parents could be returning as early as the opening of phase 3. But other factors suggested lower demand. We have a lot of survey evidence out there, both by outside research groups and also by some of our own centers that were doing surveys of their parents. They were saying that parents might be a little bit reluctant to bring their kids back into child care centers and homes right away. And we know with the high unemployment out there that might mean less demand for child care and more families able to find FFN care. That means family, friends, and neighbors who are able to care for their child rather than placing them into a child care center or a licensed child care home. So we know that there's sort of a balance here we know that this summer there's probably not going to be full child care centers and full homes regardless of what our plans were, and that was helpful to us as we thought through our approach for opening up child care in Illinois. So looking at all of the evidence, we were encouraged by the fact that in the emergency child care system, there were very few reports of outbreaks of COVID-19 among anyone who was a staff member or attending an early childhood program or a child care program. That was encouraging to us that we can do it safely to open up child care. However, we also don't know enough yet about this virus, how it's transmitted, how children are affected by the virus, and how they might transmit the virus to those in their families or those among the staff. So we, in partnership with our public health folks, talked about really being cautious as we reopen child care. So we came up with a structure that would allow programs that had already been operating in phases 1 and 2, had been doing emergency care, to move immediately to a little bit larger group size, and for new folks coming on board, for them to start slow, kind of like the emergency child care providers did with smaller group sizes, and then gradually increase the number of children they're serving. So once fully reopened, child care centers will have lower group sizes than they normally do. For infants, that's 8 infants in a group. Normally, the state allows 12. For toddlers and 2-year-olds, it'll be 12 children. Normally, it's 15 or 16. And for preschoolers and school-agers, it'll be 15 children when it's normally 20 or 30 children in a group. So we are going to be having smaller group sizes. Why are we having the smaller group sizes? Part of that is because we know that child care, as it's regulated, we have sort of a certain number of square feet that we allow per child in the program. And in order to have the kind of 6 feet separation, we're going to have more square feet per kid, which means fewer kids in the classroom. But also because the main way we're going to do social distancing for young children who aren't very good at staying away from one another is to just have them be in smaller groups and interact with fewer people. So those are the reasons behind our lower group sizes. And we will be looking at how that plays out in our child care centers over the coming months and reviewing continuously the science on coronavirus and its spreading in children and among children and adults to see whether that can be changed at all in the future as we move forward. Next slide. We know that this is going to provide serious economic challenge for child care providers. Fewer children to be in a program mean less revenue for programs because their programs are done on a per-child tuition basis. And if we did not provide any relief or help for programs, they would need to be raising their tuition to a level that most parents would not be able to afford. And so the state has taken this seriously and wants to provide some relief to providers to help them sustain their programs through this time. So on the next slide, our approach to this is to provide grants to partially offset that lost revenue for child care providers across our system. The governor announced on Wednesday the new Child Care Restoration Grants Program. This is funded through economic relief funds that are part of the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Relief Program in the CARES Act. So this is above and beyond the dedicated child care resources that were part of the CARES Act. Our state has put such a priority on child care that it is using other parts of the funds that our state has received from the CARES Act to support child care. We are the first state in the country to do something, and certainly the only one to do it anywhere close to this scale. So over $270 million focused on child care, and those of you who are child care providers, really encourage you to complete the intent to apply survey, which is at incra.org here. We are currently designing the specifics of this program and will be announcing the applications for it in July and expect the funds to be available to folks in August. So want people to give us your information through that intent to apply. It will really help us help you make it through this time of reduced class sizes. So that's what I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hawley, for sharing your expertise with us. And just so everybody knows, she will be available at the end of the presentation to answer some questions. I see a lot of questions coming in about childcare specifically, so we will definitely get to them at the end. Our last presenter, before we get into that Q&A, is Ann Spillane. Ann formerly serves as the Chief of Staff to then Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan and currently serves as General Counsel for the Office of Governor J.B. Pritzker. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Take it away, Ann.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here to discuss our guidance that we've offered to faith communities in phase 3 of the reopening of Illinois. On the second slide, you'll see the language from the executive order that kind of sets out the guidelines for phase 3, the phase that we are currently in as we move towards complete reopening. I think the most important thing to stress in these guidelines is that phase 3 makes it clear that there really are no mandatory restrictions at all on faith communities when it comes to gathering congregants for religious services. Although there are risks that come with gathering people, and I'll talk a little bit about those risks, we felt that given the importance of religious services in so many people's lives, and especially in a difficult time, many of the difficult issues we're facing right now, we thought it was critical to allow faith communities to really follow guidance, that follow best practices and adapt those best practices for their own settings so that people would be able to congregate together when it's safe and in safe ways and obtain the comfort and the community that comes from group worship. So as you see from this language, there are no mandatory restrictions. Instead, what we have put out, and we'll get to the link on the website so that you can see it, is the Illinois Department of Public Health put out really extensive guidance for faith communities to follow. So turning to the next slide, the guidance is found at that link on the IDPH website. And what the guidance tries to take into consideration is a balancing, as you would expect. On one hand, there is really quite a lot of risk that is presented in the congregational setting. I'm sure that many of you have seen that in news articles throughout the pandemic. There have been very unfortunately throughout the country a number of instances where the spread of COVID-19 has been traced to faith communities gathering. In one instance that is, very well documented, it was choir practice or a church choir. In other instances, it was religious services themselves. So there is risk in a congregational setting, and we don't want to downplay that risk. But on the other hand, as this slide notes, because of the centrality of worship in many people's lives, we felt it was important to provide guidance and offer input, but not place restrictions on faith communities. We also felt this was important because, as so many of you know, Illinois has a very diverse set of faith communities, and there are many faith communities in this state with truly extremely large facilities. And so we wanted to take that into consideration, realizing that many faith communities will be able to socially distance and to limit capacity effectively if they follow these guidelines. The guidelines that you will see on the IDPH website, and I'm going to walk you through parts of them, were created with a ton of input from many faith communities. The Catholic Church, a number of African American faith leaders reached out to us, a number of leaders in the Jewish faith reached out to us, and the list goes on. We very much benefited as we worked with the Department of Public Health for their public health guidance. We very much benefited from very practical plans that had been developed and workshopped by faith leaders throughout the state, and the guidance reflects a lot of that input. Turning to the next slide, the way that the guidance is laid out is it goes from the safest options to the slightly, more risky but still somewhat safe options, and then into just overall guidance. Because we are still seeing the spread of COVID-19, we're not out of the woods by any means. The safest options continue to be what faith communities have been doing since the start of the pandemic, which is providing remote services, streaming online, broadcast, dial-in services, as well as drive-in services. We realize that's not an option for, especially in the city, in densely populated areas where houses of worship may not have large parking lots, and there may not be a lot of room for drive-in services. But given the diversity of the state, we know there are certainly some faith communities where drive-in services present the opportunity to bring people together in a very reduced risk setting. So this, you'll see throughout the guidance, the recommendation, and this occurs in lots of guidance for all sorts of settings, the recommendation that people who are sitting together or who are in a car together be people who are living together in the same household, so there's no risk. I won't spend a lot of time on drive-in services because I know they are practical for some houses of worship and not practical for others. Turning to the next slide, what we have described as relatively safe options for in-person worship are to congregate outdoors. Now that the weather is better, that is a real option for a lot of communities, or indoors in groups of less than 10 people. Again, you'll see as a best practice that congregants who are living together stay grouped together. Of course, we recommend wearing face coverings. And something that you will see throughout the guidance for places of worship is to refrain from singing or public recitation. We know that the virus is spread through droplets that are expressed respiratory when people are singing, when people are talking loudly. And so one caution throughout this is to refrain from group singing and instead to shift when possible to having a single singer who is using a microphone, somewhat removed from other people, even greater than a 6-foot social distance away. We think that is one critical way to limit the overall risk presented by in-person gatherings. Turning to the next slide, for faith communities that want to go beyond outdoor services or go beyond indoor services that are limited to 10 people or fewer, we have tried to put together a pretty detailed set of guidance for larger indoor in-person religious gatherings. And so I won't go through each of these bullets, and a lot of these, I will certainly note, a lot of these are the same guidance that you are hearing and seeing with regard to a lot of other activities. But some specific suggestions are to set capacity limits that allow for extensive social distancing of 6 feet or more. Consider limiting attendance to 25% of building capacity or a maximum of 100 attendees. We also recommend reconfiguring, when possible, reconfiguring the setting of the house of worship in order to make it possible to allow people to come in, but create the more than 6 feet distance. Overall, we recommend that as houses of worship go through steps to expand the size of their gatherings, that you do this gradually, allowing time for congregants to learn how this is going to work, to get used to entering and exiting a facility through certain doors, to get used to sitting in certain areas and not in other areas, and also to allow the faith community an opportunity to see, have there been outbreaks? Are congregants reporting that they have gotten ill? To kind of test the waters and see how this goes. Of course, we recommend considering separate, smaller services for groups of people who are more vulnerable, those who are 65 or older, individuals who may have pre-existing health conditions that make them more vulnerable. And one suggestion we got that I want to highlight that we received from a number of faith communities was to consider a reservation system. So having people, whether online is feasible or through phone calls, having congregants reserve seats at a service in advance. This presents a lot of benefits, as you can imagine. One, it allows for assigned seating. It allows for the leadership of the church or faith community to feel comfortable that they really have the ability to social distance. It also allows for staggered arrival times. One of the biggest difficulties that the Department of Public Health has flagged in having large groups congregate in church is the period of time where people are entering and exiting. That is going to be the hardest thing to do while maintaining social distancing. So a reservation system also allows for staggered arrival times. And finally, very importantly, a reservation system will allow the faith community to have the names of people who've attended, to allow for contact tracing if it is later learned that someone who attended a service was at that moment asymptomatic, but was positive for COVID-19. And so we want to have the ability to go back and communicate to other congregants that they may want to get tested. They may want to self-isolate. Again, you'll see the common sense recommendations to avoid singing. And also, we do highly recommend that faith communities, as you're bringing people back for in-person worship, very strongly consider not engaging in a lot of other activities that you may have engaged in the past, offering food or beverages, congregating for group meals or potlucks or buffet suppers, anything like that, we would recommend continuing to hold off on. Turning to the next slide, as you would expect, and as you see in a lot of other settings, including workplaces, the Department of Public Health recommends considering screening, certainly staff and volunteers, as well as congregants when they arrive, encouraging everyone, staff, congregants, visitors, not to come to the house of worship if they are not feeling well. Post signage. Signage is going to be absolutely critical for faith communities to do this well and to have people feel comfortable returning to in-person services. Signage that helps people understand entering and exiting, as well as where they're sitting to maintain a social distance. On the next slide, we've identified some other control measures. One is, and these again came from faith communities, the suggestion that we thought was a very good one of trying to recruit volunteers who may be from non-vulnerable groups. So, a lot of faith communities rely on volunteers who may be older, trying to kind of limit the use of those volunteers during this period, maybe assigning them to volunteer services that keep them away from crowds, and perhaps recruiting other volunteers who don't fall into categories of people who are vulnerable so that they can help. Shorten the length of services to limit the amount of contact that people are having as well. The last bullet on this slide is, of course, one you're seeing in every place now and with all guidance, which is to really perform a thorough cleaning of high traffic areas, anything that congregants touch, anything that might be shared, podiums, microphones, and to also really limit any kind of shared objects. consider taking out of the house of worship any kind of normally shared hymnals or other items. A lot of these, as you've seen over the last few slides, a lot of these are very common sense measures that people are becoming used to. We just wanted to put them all in one document produced by the Department of Public Health so that faith leaders can have one place where they can go to consult kind of the best practices and the best available guidance. Turning to the last slide, if there are overall points that we can make, something to just keep in mind is we really urge every faith community to put together a plan for dealing with COVID-19. And that would include things like reconfiguring the facility, considering a reservation system, making sure that people can sit with the members of their household, but more than 6 feet away from anyone else. Develop that plan. Be prepared to adapt to that plan as public health guidance changes. And unfortunately, I think we all have to be prepared to adapt plans if we have to go backwards. If we discover that there has been an incidence or multiple incidences of COVID-19 positives among a faith community, be prepared to take a step back and restrict services. And then probably most importantly, provide as much clear guidance to staff and congregants as possible. Consider using blast emails and text messages and mailings to people, as well as signage. We all are at risk as we're reopening. We're all at risk of just returning to the way we always do things, walking into the church that we're so comfortable going to and forgetting that things are a little different now, that we can't sit in the seat we usually sit in. We can't greet the people we haven't seen in a while in the same way we would have. And so many faith leaders stress to us that a big part of their plan is to push out as much information in advance and then to do it routinely to their congregants so that they get used to this new world of what it's like to attend worship services in the era of COVID-19. With that, I will turn this over to any questions for me or Teresa.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we are going to be moving on to question and answer. And as Ann mentioned, Dr. Hawley and herself will both be available on the panel. And also joining us on the panel is Lucretia Parks, the Vice President of Portfolio Management for Chicago Community Loan Fund, to answer any questions about the Cook County Recovery Initiative loan program, which is great because I actually do see a couple of questions about that program. So glad to have you with us. To get started, though, I want to start with a couple of questions for Dr. Hawley about childcare. The first question is, how can I help to reinstill confidence with my parents that I can safely reopen?
That's a wonderful question. I think we really encourage for providers to be reaching out to parents and talking with them, sending them information about all of the cleaning protocols, all of the screening protocols that are required every day as children and staff come to the center or to the home, that you'll be, taking temperatures, doing health checks, making sure that everyone who's coming into your facility is well, and as well as helping share with them what you're going to be doing in your classrooms to make sure that kids are staying further apart, that you're going to keep groups of children apart. And sharing all the things that you're doing, I think, will help build the confidence of families in bringing their kids back to the center. It's challenging because one of the things that we're not really going to be able to do is to let the parents come into the center themselves, into the classrooms, and sort of observe for a long time, which is one of the ways we often help folks get comfortable with childcare. Can't really do that now, so consider whether you ought to do some short video tours of all of the great things that you're doing. I've seen a few of them on Facebook that people have done, really help parents understand all the safeguards that are in place.
Thank you. That's a very helpful answer. My daycare center also provides meals for my students. Are there any differences in meal preparation standards that I should be considering?
One of the things that we usually do in early childhood is to have folks be served family style. So we do that for developmental reasons, teaching the children how to serve themselves. There's lots of good things to come from that. We can't do that right now. So I think in meal preparation, we need to make sure that we're plating the meals individually for kids and then giving them their plates. You may consider whether you want to go to disposable dinnerware with the kids. Although if you have a normal sanitizing procedure for your plates and silverware, that should be okay.
Great, and we will be coming back to you, but I want to pivot over to Ann to ask a couple of questions about places of worship. First question, do you recommend contact tracing before reopening if I know of members of the congregation who did get sick?
I think if it's possible to do that, that is terrific. Although I don't think that is absolutely necessary. I think what probably is necessary is that, sending a reminder to congregants to let everyone know that if they've been in contact with someone who they're aware has been sick, they really should self-isolate, self-quarantine and refrain from attending services until they're out of any period of risk of coming down with COVID-19. I think that is the most important, is just kind of constantly sending that reminder. An additional thing that is in the Department of Public Health guidance that I didn't draw attention to in my remarks is using the outreach to congregants as an opportunity to let them know where they can get testing. On the IDPH website, you can find that information. We do think now that testing is widely available and people can get tests when they feel they need to or want to, churches are another important way to get that information out to people, and I think it's a good message to send to congregants on behalf of the faith community, reminding them that they have to be very vigilant about not coming together with others when there's any risk that they've been exposed.
Thank you. And to follow up on that, where should I go to report for contact tracing for members of my congregation who get sick after I reopen?
I recommend reaching out to first of all, if you're in Cook County, to the Cook County Department of Public Health, if in the City of Chicago, to the City of Chicago Department of Public Health, and or to the Illinois Department of Public Health. But for those in Chicago, the first call should be the City of Chicago Department of Public Health.
Thank you. Real quick, I want to turn to Lucretia here. What are some of the qualifications for the Cook County Recovery Initiative grant program? Can you walk us through those, please?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. The Cook County Community Recovery Loan Fund is an actual loan with a 0% interest rate. The program is for suburban Cook County small businesses and entrepreneurs. Again, that's for suburban Cook County small businesses and entrepreneurs who have been in business in 2019 and have experienced revenue losses due to COVID-19. Also, if you've received assistance through other assistance programs for the same expenses, those expenses are not allowed for this program, so they would have to be different expenses that you can apply for under this program. And the term is from 1 year to 5 years. Again, the interest rate is 0%. The loans for small businesses is from, the maximum is $20,000, and it's based on needs. And for entrepreneurs, the maximum loan amount is $10,000, and again, that's based on need.
Thank you.
Would commence on, one last thing, repayment would start on the 7th month after the loan closes. Right now, the applications are open. The application window does close on Wednesday of next week, June 17th at 11:59 p.m.
And would a nonprofit organization be eligible for this program or no?
At this time, nonprofit organizations are not eligible under this program.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. Hopefully, some of the businesses that are on the webinar today can apply and take advantage of that program. I want to turn back again to Dr. Hawley on child care. I know that you mentioned the smaller group sizes are designed to maintain social distancing, but how can I keep kids' masks on, and how can I maintain some social distancing with my younger clients at the daycare center?
Sure, it's definitely a challenge, and not at all the way that we're normally thinking about helping children develop their social skills by playing together and working together. There's a lot of things that you're going to need to do to think about setting up your room in new ways. Perhaps circle time is not all the kids tightly together on a rug, but you have little circles all over your room where the kids can sit more dispersed while you have those kind of activities. Setting up more and smaller centers within your room where kids can play certainly in much smaller groups and maybe with a little bit more space between them, not having activities set up at tables for 1 or 2 children rather than for 4 or 5. Lots of these things that you're going to need to rethink about how we do all our educational activities with young children in the classroom. Luckily, it's summer, so spending as much time outdoors is another great way to have the space and have kids to be able to space out. Using masks will be challenging. There's lots of great videos out there now about how to help introduce kids to masks, teach them about them, and help them to use them.
Thank you. And our last question for you today, Dr. Hawley, do you have any specific advice for child care centers that specialize in children with disabilities?
So not at this time. We are working on having some more guidance for programs that are working with children with disabilities. I think that those who specialize in that have a pretty deep knowledge of the needs of those young children, and would appreciate any feedback that people have about our current guidance and information that's out there in ways that you can see within your programs that you think that needs to be thought about differently or modified in order to be able to best meet the needs of young children with disabilities. I will say folks should be on the lookout. We will be providing some revised guidance over the course of the next week from our Department of Children and Family Services and Department of Human Services. So we'll be continuing to put out guidance, and as I said, really looking at what we're learning from the science, what that means for how we can best serve kids in child care programs.
Thank you. And let's do one more question for today before we wrap up. This one's for Ann. It's integral to my worship practices to share communion. Do you have any advice or best practices on how to do that safer?
I think that this is something that each faith community is wrestling with. Some of the recommendations or proposed plans that we saw from faith leaders were to, in advance of arrival, to place communion in a container on the seats where people will be taking their seat. Another is to put communion in a container or have the ability to convey it to someone without having individuals touch their hands, and certainly to discontinue placing communion directly on the tongue of a congregant. Those are the ideas that we heard from faith leaders. I'm sure that there are others, depending on kind of the configuration or the number of people who will be attending the service. But I think the safest one that we heard and that the Department of Public Health felt was the safest was a situation where the communion wafer was placed in a container. The faith community was using either a reservation system or directing people very specifically to seating and placing communion on the seats in advance so that there was less movement during the service as well as less risk of contact among individuals. But I think that one thing that was made very clear from the discussions we had with faith leaders is that there's just a tremendous amount of thought and care being placed on these issues, in particular the issue of communion by faith leaders. So I hope that you will see a really thought out and safe method of doing that so that you and other people can continue to celebrate communion as part of your worship service.
All right, thank you, Ann, and thank you to all of our panelists. I know I went a little bit past 11, so I appreciate all of you staying on with me to answer some of those last-minute questions. I know we didn't get to everybody's questions. We had a lot of questions rolling in, but if you have lingering concerns, please visit our websites for more information and contact us with additional questions. Those websites are on the screen now. The state of Illinois has also released some helpful toolkits that you will find at the URL at the bottom of your screen when it comes to reopening. And I would especially like to thank Governor Pritzker for his support of the small business community, and an extra thank you to his senior staff for sharing their experience and joining us today on the webinar. As I mentioned before, these slides are downloadable from your viewing portal on the Resources tab of your viewing screen, and we will be uploading a video recording of this webinar onto the ABIC Vimeo page, so you will be able to access it again. Thank you everybody so much for attending. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend as well. Thank you all very much.